Hi, readers. Miss Smiles here again. Today I'm going to read to you Chapter 3 of Mercy Watson to the Rescue. As we're reading today, we're going to focus on the main character, Mercy Watson. As I'm reading the story to you today, I want you to be thinking about words that will describe our character, Mercy Watson. So let's get started here and take a look at Chapter 3. Before we begin, let's take a look at our picture and see what we notice. So I remember at the end of chapter 2, there was one board that was coming up from the floor. Now we have several boards coming up from the floor. There's a crack and there is like an opening in the floor. Here in the bed, I see Mr. Watson, Mrs. Watson, and Mercy, and they all look pretty shook up. They look afraid at the moment. Another thing I notice is that when I'm looking at the picture on the wall, I see a picture of Mrs. Watson, Mercy Watson, and Mr. Watson. And when I look at Mercy's picture, her picture is bigger than Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson, as if she's the star of the show. So again, this is helping us understand that it's all about Mercy. She is the main character in this story. So let's take a look to see what's happening here in chapter 3. Boom! A hole opened under the Watsons' bed. Crack! The Watsons' bed fell into the hole. Mr. Watson woke up. Mrs. Watson woke up. Mercy woke up too. What the? Said Mr. Watson. So let's take a look at our next picture here. Now Mrs. Watson is completely afraid, upset, and shocked. She just has a look of panic on her face. And Mr. Watson is looking at her, and I guess he's saying, gee, she is really, really upset right now. When we look at Mercy, she does have a bit of a panicky look on her face, but she's moved from in between Mr. and Mrs. Watson. Now she is coming towards the end of the bed. So let's see what's happening here on page 14. Oink, said Mercy. It's an earthquake, shouted Mrs. Watson. It's the end of the world. Nonsense, said Mr. Watson, but he didn't sound very sure. He sounded frightened. Mercy, however, was not frightened. Mercy was hungry. Oink, said Mercy again. She moved to the end of the bed. Boom! Crack! So let's take a second to think about our main character. So far, what can we say that will describe Mercy at this point? At this point, she's thinking about eating. She has food on the brain. So what word can you use to describe her at the moment? Let's continue reading. No pictures here to notice, so let's just keep reading. The bed fell a little farther into the hole in the floor. Don't move, shouted Mr. Watson. Whatever you do, don't move. Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson and Mercy held very still. Mrs. Watson started to cry. I know exactly what we must do, said Mr. Watson. We must call the fire department. They will rescue us. But you said we should not move, said Mrs. Watson. How can we call the fire department if we cannot move? Mercy recalled her lovely toast-filled dream. She wondered if there was any toast in the kitchen. While Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson were arguing, Mercy hopped off the bed. Boom! Crack! So, friends, at this point, Mercy is again thinking about herself and she is thinking about the fact that she's hungry. So, let's see what else happened. So, if I notice, we do some noticing here in the picture. Here's Mercy with her tongue hanging out. She has a smile on her face. She looks like she has a plan. Meanwhile, in the background, Mr. and Mrs. Watson are in the bed, and it seems like the bed has sank further into the floor. So let's see what's going to happen here. Look, said Mrs. Watson. "Mercy has escaped." "She's going to find help," said Mr. Watson. "She's going to alert the fire department." Mercy left the bedroom at a gallop. She was in a hurry. She was on her way to the kitchen. She was looking for some toast. So, friends, one word that pops into my mind as we think about Mercy and her actions at this point is she's constantly thinking about food. So, one word I think we could use to describe Mercy is greedy. So, I want you to think of some other words that you could use to describe our main character, Mercy Watson. Until then, see you later, readers.